What is it that you think led to Sony deciding to come forward and release this not only online, but in roughly 300 theaters?
I think Sony's kind of reacting to a swing in public opinion, if you will. I think initially when the news first broke about the hacking, and I think they took a very cautious approach and just decided to step back, pull the movie back from all distribution, all release. But in the several days since they made that announcement, I think a lot of public opinion has swung towards a side of free speech, and that Sony, some way, somehow, should get this movie out into the marketplace. Of course, President Obama weighed in as well. So I think that all weighed upon Sony. And since then, over the last couple of days, I think they've been talking with all their partners, both at the theatrical level and also on the online distribution level, to see is there any way that we can get this movie out as quickly as we can to as many, to as wide an audience as we can in a, I think a responsible way.
Yeah, Jordan, we saw from the hackers that they're threatening some kind of 9/11 style attack. How vulnerable does that leave Sony and the theaters that are distributing this?
Well, I think a lot of people, took a look at that threat, and certainly the Homeland Security Department also took a look at it and said that there was no credible evidence of a physical attack imminent. So, a lot of people took from that some comfort that we can go to the movie theaters. These are computer hackers, most likely not physical attackers. But certainly releasing the movie online, there's a business calculation as well, is that Sony's trying to recoup any money of the $80 million it spent making and promoting this movie, and they'll only get a fraction of that online and through the 300 theaters where they're distributing this movie. It was originally intended to open in 3,000, so Sony's going to take a big loss on this one, but at least it's getting out, and there was a lot of public pressure on them to do this.
Let me just share with you some news that we're getting. It is being reported that the interview, the movie, is going to be available today at 1 p.m. on YouTube for rent. Cory Johnson, are there going to be people out there that might be reluctant to download this movie because they're concerned about potential hackers and malware creeping into their own computers?
I mean, who knows what the individual reactions will be. It's really interesting to watch Sony try to navigate this from a business perspective. There's tremendous change, of course, going on in the movie industry, the least of which is the shrinking of time from when a movie is released in the theater to when it's released online and released for home video. That was 170 days 5 years ago. It's down to 103 days in the third quarter. Now it's apparently going to be on the same day with this release. Sony has its own online video service, the little-known Crackle, which is trying to compete with Netflix and the like. And so that's one of the services one might expect Sony to release this online. But if they're trying to get theaters to run this now in this reversal of course, and at the same time putting it online, undercutting the theatrical business, it raises lots of issues about their relationship with the theaters, their relationship with the individual theaters, the support they have from their own business of Crackle and partnerships they might have with other outlets like Google or like Netflix. It also raises the big question of what kind of insurance settlement they might get. They reportedly were looking at a $75 million loss on this release. So what does that mean for this insurance settlement if this movie does get out there, and what kind of profit might they ultimately make from this thing that's getting publicity like no other movie has?
A lot of questions. Is anybody surprised here that Sony did this about face, Jordan? I mean, to say, look, we're not going to release it, and then suddenly to say, okay, here it is?
Once the president mentioned it in his press conference and publicly shamed Sony for not releasing it, it was really inevitable at this point that they would release it. But Cory raised an interesting point about the insurance. It's a very significant factor in all of this, because if Sony was not able to release the movie, it could potentially write off all of its costs and expenses for making and promoting it. But now that it's releasing it, it can no longer go back to the insurer and say the whole thing is a loss.
Wow,
so
that's
they're going to take a hit on it, and that's it's an interesting side note.
I mean, roughly, Paul, we're hearing somewhere around $200 million.
I think the all-in cost is, the direct cost is $100 million, but the bigger issue, I think, for Sony has always been the reputational risk with the creative community in Hollywood, with the directors and the writers and the producers. Will they stand behind the movie? And then also with their theater distributors as well. So they have a lot of relationship building to do.
Cory, I think he makes a really good point. If I'm a film creator, director, writer in Hollywood right now, I might not want to work with Sony on my next project, because there's this fear that, if I do anything that's politically incorrect, I may have the North Koreans coming down on me.
Well, I mean, forget Kim Jong-un. They've ticked off George Clooney. I mean, you know, in Hollywood, it is a lot about the relationships. And now, you know, they've added in the last hour, added in this complication with their relationship with the theater owners themselves and those important couple of chains, as well as the independent theater owners. If they're going to be putting this thing out there online or even announcing the possibility of it being online, just as people could be lining up to buy tickets to buy this thing at Christmas to make a statement, Sony has really mismanaged this over and over again throughout this problem that has crept up in their business.
So is this going to cost anyone a job?
I think it really points out how difficult this is. Yeah, well, I mean, who knows? I mean, on some level, I think a lot of people were thinking that it was unfair that their personal emails were hacked and that they were kind of being embarrassed here. But they really have bungled this in many counts, and we may be seeing more of that in real time right now.